Thank you all for joining us today for this College Scholar Talk. We're excited to hear from our very own Dr. David Vanderham, who is an associate professor of humanities and research associate with the Center for the Study of Music, Media, and Place at Memorial University, Newfoundland. When David is not spending his time as a faculty fellow for the Center of Teaching and Learning, you can find him in his office surrounded by hilarious and amazing artwork in his office created by former students. If it is over the lunch hour, David will most certainly be enjoying an apple and his first love, overnight oats. Colleagues describe David as someone who can communicate intelligently about his course material and have the self-confidence to make a fool of himself, as evidence from his decision to start hopping up and down in a crazy pigeon-toed position, attempting to imitate a scene from the opera The Mikado during his Johnson County Community College interview. David is courageous in that his PhD is from UNC Chapel Hill. So, this dates us in 2022 when KU beat UNC and won the NCAA Men's Basketball Championship. KU diehard fan and David's chair, Professor Allison Smith, came into work very early the next morning and covered David's office with Jayhawk memorabilia. David had the gall to text Allison about her act of vandalism, as to which Allison, who was in a meeting with another KU diehard fan, Dean Jim Lane, stated, "Jim said if you don't put the Jayhawks back on your door, you're fired." David's explanation? Let me explain. In closing, David, we are excited to learn from you. Please give a warm welcome to our very own Dr. David Vanderham.
Thank you. It's one thing to vandalize an office door. It's another thing to vandalize an introduction, Allison. And thank you, everybody, for being here. I know noon hour is hard. Just so some of you probably don't make a habit of going to talks from ethnomusicologists. We are a fairly formalized field, so I have a written talk here. I will try not to be wooden for you, but if you're wondering, like, this feels scripted, oh yes, heavily so. So my big project for the last decade has been the topic of virtuosity, which in my work I define as skill made apparent and socially meaningful. It's skill that matters such that it becomes an explicit locus of value. I developed this definition to accomplish several things, but its most immediate purpose was to undercut the assumption that virtuosity is inevitably about superlatives, the fastest, the loudest, the most of whatever type. I found, however, that the word skill can itself be misleading, as many take it to mean sheer ability. But as anthropologist Tim Ingold makes clear, skill is more a dynamic relationship than an individual capacity, more about the perception of an adaptation to the environment than the simple transformation of it. Philosopher Hubert Dreyfus similarly prefers not to speak of skill, but of skillful coping. The terminological shift emphasizes that we engage with the world on unsteady terms. We do not shape reality from without, creating matter and bestowing meaning from above. We negotiate meaning. We cope from within. These are scholarly truisms, but they are true, not just in general terms, but of the process of academic labor itself. We are thrown, to use the existentialist term, into a social world of which our fields and subfields are but a small part, and we learn to navigate them even as they begin to shape us. When you begin the process of writing, say, a dissertation, you are told to make a contribution to the field, but that productive act is, especially at first, an act of coping. We nod knowingly. One that we hopefully perform with some degree of skill. So let me offer two brief examples as prologue to this talk. So first I was thrown, like most graduate students, into the state of my topic. Scholarship on virtuosity in music studies has long been dominated by conceptual models drawn from the 19th century, particularly the example of pianist Franz Liszt. Musicologist James DeVille, himself a respected Liszt scholar, has dubbed this the Liszt problem. Even studies that make no reference to Liszt in distant genres from jazz to heavy metal frequently follow his implicit model of masculinized, sublime virtuosity. So, I coped. Even before DeVille named the Liszt problem for me, I sensed its effects. My early attempts at studying 21st virtuosities felt somehow groundless. As I sought out relevant literature and concepts, I found that I ended up gesturing vaguely toward the 19th century. The scholarship on that period, to be clear, is excellent, but these tools made for Parisian salons were at times ill-suited to the culturally and historically distant situations that interested me. Increasingly, 21st century virtuosities seemed impossible to interpret without filling in the gap and considering 20th century virtuosities on their own terms, which must include thinking in terms of mediation. So my forthcoming book, which is titled Virtuosity in the Age of Electronic Media, arose from a desire to fill that gap. In it, I make space for the Lisztian model as simply one virtuosity among many, not as a paradigm for the phenomenon in its entirety. And much of the book focuses on largely forgotten virtuosities from 20th century American popular culture. More recently, and on a more local level, I was thrown into the state of my own writing project. In the summer of 2024, I received a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities to complete my book, but my plans for the remaining chapter fell through. So I coped. I had funding, time, no real disciplinary prescriptions to hold me back, and nothing to lose. So I decided to try something in the final body chapter of my book that I avoided pretty much everywhere else. Rather than seeking out evidence of other people's experiences of virtuosity, I turned to my own mediated encounters, which is what I'll be presenting on today. As I began navigating this new scholarly register, I found myself pairing first-person phenomenology with critical voices from media studies and music, in a way that resembled what media scholar Abigail Ducosnik calls personal theory. Ducosnik advocates for this combination of personal narrative with theoretical arguments because, she argues, it suits our historical, technological, and cultural moment. I would add that personal theory suggests a degree of intellectual humility, one that is especially necessary when writing of online experiences. Our atomized digital lives make it increasingly difficult to know whether or if any experience is held in common. I share the online environments I navigate with many people, but we are frequently anonymous to one another, uncertain how we came together or where we are going. At the same time, I'm never alone in these environments, as algorithms constitute a kind of presence that hovers at the edges of my awareness while playing a tremendous structuring role in my experience. Although there are a range of valuable methods for studying digital culture and the many ways that online environments adapt to each of our individual actions and histories, the clearest way forward, and the one chosen here, is to speak for myself in hopes that I may stumble onto some common ground in the digital darkness. So, enough prologue. Let's begin. I begin with a scene that is almost certainly familiar to each of you. It's too common to really serve as a vignette. A person sits with phone or computer streaming content on YouTube. On any given day, over 122 million people find themselves in this position. And there are many reasons one might join this anonymous throng. Maybe a friend sent a leak via message or email, or perhaps someone or some corporate entity shared a video on social media. On one particular day last year, I came to the platform thinking of Kaki, a musician I first saw on television in December 2004 on The Late Show with David Letterman. YouTube itself was launched just 6 months after that performance, and the footage was posted on the site for the first of several times a little more than a year later. My initial search for King brings up that Letterman performance, and I'm struck by the fact that YouTube's ever-expanding online repository has made it possible for me to stumble with little effort onto a television clip that I casually enjoyed 2 decades ago. It almost seems meant to be this media reunion, but I'm drawn instead to a more recent video of King performing a piece called The Surface Changes. It's not immediately clear to me why I've selected this video, but I suspect it comes down to visual appeal. The thumbnail image is intriguing, even a bit perplexing. It shows King in a very dimly lit room in front of a well-aged brick wall, holding a guitar that is luminescent, aglow with the image of a thunderhead in an otherwise bright blue sky. The audiovisual richness of the video beckons, and we'll get to it. But before I click play, Before I can even imagine what forms this next virtuosity might take, the platform and its algorithmic underpinnings have already molded my experience. The very possibility of being drawn to a particular video depends on its position in the search results, and the surface changes was one of the first. Few things are as simultaneously mundane yet opaque to us as the internet search bar, but it's clear that whatever algorithmic intervention occurs between those few strokes of my keyboard and the long list of video options I peruse is enormously consequential for my eventual experience. Search engines are technologies of attention that both reveal and conceal. What I might think of in passing as a tool of access is also a tool of exclusion, one that, as Alexander Halavey reminds us, allows us to blind ourselves to the distractions inherent to the web in order to focus on a relatively small handful of pages that the search engine assures us are most applicable to the topic at hand. Any of the virtuosities I might encounter through streaming are always already taking shape in relation to the digital architecture of this environment. So in this talk, I'm going to examine virtuosity in the context of these streaming practices by exploring three common paths for engaging online content. First, I can simply view a single video, be amazed, and move on to a different task. This is decidedly not what YouTube is built to encourage. It is the least desirable from the standpoint of the platform, content creators, and advertisers. But it's perfectly plausible given a degree of self-control. I call this only what I came for. Second, I can engage in what I call accelerated fandom, utilizing YouTube, social media, and other online outlets to amass a wide array of media texts and paratexts about a particular artist in the span of mere minutes or hours. Lastly, I can surf the algorithm, taking its recommendations and watching a slew of videos that I curate in tandem with the platform's nudging. In what follows, I explore each of these paths separately for the sake of clarity, but it's exceedingly common for them to weave together in a way that all of us would no doubt find familiar. What begins as a search for specific content quickly becomes a more widespread engagement with the musician or an hour lost to indiscriminate streaming. In attributing a structuring power to streaming media at the outset, I do not intend to drift into any straightforward technological determinism. I explore three different, if frequently overlapping paths, precisely because we retain some agency in this process, and there are no doubt many additional paths we might take. At the same time, digital architecture can exert influence in much the same way as physical architecture. And the algorithms operating behind online interfaces exercise a social power that we regularly experience, even if their technical workings elude us. So as my talk will demonstrate, the social power ultimately contributes to simultaneous intensifications and crises of value, alternately scattering and amplifying our focus. At times, the algorithms almost seem to care for me, obviating the very attention that serves as the primary economic driver of this online ecosystem. But let's start streaming. When I click on the surface changes, I find King playing in a way typical of many guitarists, sometimes grouped under the heading of contemporary or modern fingerstyle. This style is performed by solo guitarists who utilize techniques of finger picking, two-hand tapping, and percussive approaches to the instrument. At the start of the video, however, the technique is more intentionally limited, even austere. King sets the strings in motion simply by hammering on and pulling off with the fingers of her left hand. This is how she plays the entirety of the opening, meaning for the first 15 seconds, her right hand hangs motionless at her side. This music largely conforms to my genre expectations, but these visuals are a marked departure from them. The technique of contemporary fingerstyle lends itself to a choreographed, somewhat theatrical presentation. Musical and gestural flourishes abound as hands fly, drawing sound from the instrument in unexpected ways. Guitarists in this genre, in other words, usually perform emotional and musical labor in tandem, working hard to emote or at least convey meaning through their bodily comportment as they play. Even if they don't engage in the easily mocked contortions of what Phil Auslander calls guitar face, kind of thing, they usually sport a look of concentration, pensiveness, involvement, something. But there's no hint of that here. King appears dressed head to toe in white, and any expression I might read in her eyes is obscured by her large, very white sunglasses. The absence of any movements beyond those strictly necessary for sound production is arresting, even a bit unnerving. After the first iteration of the piece's primary riff, as you heard, the lights fade and a series of straight lines appear on King's guitar, morphing into various shapes that give the illusion of depth through their intersection. The song is part of an audio-visual project called The Neck is a Bridge to the Body, in which the guitar itself is precision mapped as a backdrop for the visual spectacle projected upon it. As she begins adding percussion with her right hand, the shapes intensify into something resembling lightning before flaking away, leaving a projection of a far more traditional acoustic guitar. Oceans, microscopic organisms, schools of fish all flash upon the instrument in succession. The spectacle of virtuosity has been rejected and then relocated onto the instrument itself. Feel free to ask me about this at the end. I don't think this makes sense to anybody, but there it is. Returning to the video's sonic properties, the sparse two-voice texture that begins the surface changes might not seem impressive from a purely musical standpoint, but the appreciation of King's skill depends upon a partial awareness of how she produces these sounds. Although the piece ends by accelerating into a climactic finish that bears many of the classic hallmarks of virtuosity, YouTube comments about her amazing use of the guitar as a percussive instrument as well as the harmonic tapping clearly reference the first half of the song, as the conclusion includes no percussive playing on the body. It might initially seem that King's approach in this piece is a necessary path to aesthetic ends, but there remains an element of arbitrariness to her technical choices. Why play solo in the first place? There are certainly economic and practical motivations for doing so. A single body makes the logistics of scheduling and turning a profit easier. But if economic reasoning can explain why King elects not to have a percussionist or second guitarist ease the load of her musical labor, she could also achieve very similar, if not identical, musical outcomes with the use of another relatively simple and affordable technology, that of a digital looping pedal, which would outsource some of the labor to her feet and the pedal's circuitry. Live versus looped performance is not necessarily a question of aesthetics, or at least not aesthetics in the narrow sense. The layered percussion and repeated riff that make up much of the surface changes bears similarities to other performers who layer multiple live tracks of harmonies, bass lines, and percussion parts with the aid of such loopers. So if there are other, less demanding ways to produce the sounds that comprise the surface changes, and these might be just as aesthetically pleasing as the means she employs, why not make use of them? The simple answer is that there's a degree of ethical value at play here. She and her audience would not consider these alternative approaches to be the right way of making music. The action is aesthetically effective, to be sure, but it is also understood in some way to be good, a commendable use of human creative energy. On to path 2. After enjoying a single video, I decided to take advantage of a remarkable affordance of the internet and engage in what I call accelerated fandom. Because of the vast number of recordings, videos, texts, and paratexts available online, I can go from casual listener to full fanatic in the span of an afternoon or two. Such accelerated fandom was possible prior to the internet, but the conditions had to be perfect. In the right record store, seeking out the right artist, and with plenty of cash to spend, there might be a wide variety of recordings and articles and merchandise that would allow the type of fast-paced familiarization and appreciation that I describe here. But today, accelerated fandom is an ever-present option online. This rapid-fire familiarization frequently takes the form of bricolage. As I stream videos, I concoct a poorly paced concert film. As I read interviews and paratexts, I cobble together a digital fanzine of her quips and other fans' responding comments. Streaming thus produces an ad hoc variety show, but because it's unlikely that anyone will string these videos together in exactly this way ever again, the pseudo-artifact is in some ways a pseudo-performance. Each individual clip retains its repeatability, but for practical purposes, the sequence has lost this basic affordance of recording technology. So I begin my accelerated fandom by learning more about the project that the Surface Changes is part of. And I quickly find a short video discussing the inspiration behind it. At the start of the video, the project's grand scope is stated in text overlay. The neck is a bridge to the body, lays bare the guitar's inner life and protean power, the instrument serving as an ontological tabula rasa in a creation myth unlike any other. This begins to place the images from the Surface Changes into a narrative rather than synesthetic register. All the images of nature and movement, was that the world coming into being? It's almost impossible to seek out material about Kaki King without quickly encountering one of the touchstones of her reception, which came in 2007 when she was the only woman named in Rolling Stone's list of the new guitar gods. David Frick wrote, "King is a genre unto herself, punctuating her acoustic fingerpicking with fret hammering and slap bass funk, a gripping hybrid of Michael Hedges, Eddie Van Halen, and Bootsy Collins. This is an odd compliment, again for reasons I can explain later if you're unsure. And on further searching, I find that King agrees. Although she has great respect for these musicians, she muses that a combination of them would produce a funk metal shredder bastard. Indulging further in my accelerated fandom, I find that King was not interviewed for this article, and she sometimes seems to enjoy making fun of it, but being the only woman granted guitar god status from a prominent publication has provided a compelling biographical bullet point and quick proof of her relevance ever since. The same year that Rolling Stone sang her praises, Foo Fighters frontman Dave Grohl made a comment about her opening set that has been just as widely repeated. There are some players that are good, and there are some guitar players that are really effing good, and then there's Kaki King. It's not surprising that these early endorsements remain front and center in later pieces of media, but it is odd how often these same pieces imply that King is still somehow being discovered. However, it makes my experience of accelerated fandom feel more exciting. Here I am, at the vanguard. If the speed and ease of accelerated fandom are its most notable qualities, one of the strangest aspects of the experience is the way that the chronology of content is often obscured or de-emphasized. It seems that the search algorithms I'm engaging are more interested in popularity than recency, but this is at best a hunch. As media scholar Michelle Wilson points out, many of the algorithms we encounter daily are proprietary owned and thus opaque and inaccessible to outside critique. Nonetheless, their workings have wide-ranging consequences for the shape and direction of our everyday lives. Wilson's observations make me feel a tinge of paranoia, and for the first time I wonder, just how organic is this accelerated fandom? When I start looking more closely at the dates of various articles and videos, one of the biggest differences between King's reception today and 15 to 20 years ago is the role of gender. Whereas it was once widely remarked upon, gender seems to be less of a point of emphasis in more recent interviews. In a world where we increasingly recognize the foundational role of Willie Mae Big Mama Thornton in rock and roll, and when St. Vincent and Her are among the most prominent guitarists in popular music, perhaps we've moved beyond the purported novelty of a woman playing guitar extremely well. But it seems audiences have often been aware, prodded on, no doubt, by various paratexts that persist with unusual vigor on the internet, that King does not possess what musicologist Blake Howe calls the guitar's standard performance body. Although she appears able-bodied and thus is normative in that respect, articles and interviews regularly emphasized her gender and her short stature as ostensibly surprising qualities for such an accomplished musician. Like so many virtuosos throughout history, she can be presented as a rarity, perhaps even as a singular musical talent, as Frick's genre unto herself designation indicates. On to another video. This time a clip from a 2008 TED conference, where King began her set with the highly percussive Playing with Pink Noise. The YouTube video's description again promotes King's original claim to fame. Kaki King, the first female on Rolling Stone's Guitar God list, rocks out to a full live set at TED 2008. Jaw-dropping virtuosity meets a guitar technique that truly stands out. The performance begins, however, not with technical displays, but with a philosophical prologue. I was thinking about my place in the universe, muses King. This launches a brief discussion of her childhood thoughts on time and infinity. I'm not joking. And it culminates in an existential crisis of sorts. If time stretches on infinitely, then every point in time is really infinitely small and therefore somewhat meaningless. She resolves this crisis by reversing the perspective, noting that if every moment is infinitely small, that means all moments are equal. In that way, every moment really is the most important moment that's ever happened, including this moment right now. And so therefore, this music you're about to hear is maybe the most important music you'll ever hear in your life. I don't have time to play you the clip, but you trust me, King comes off as reflective enough to have actually entertained these thoughts and affable enough to not sound completely self-obsessed or insincere. She smiles as she declares her performance the center of all meaning, and the audience laughs appreciatively, at least to my ear. This grand introduction was made to the audience at this live event, but it also captures something of the implicit hopes I entertain as I click on each new video in this experience of accelerated fandom. None bring me directly to the moment of performance, but neither do they function as mere records of prior events. My concern with them is not primarily epistemic or dogmatic. I do not feel compelled to watch and acknowledge or even believe what I've seen and heard. Instead, to draw on a Theodor Adorno's metaphor of the virtuoso as a martyr, I find myself positioned to witness them, to realize each video's potential and affirm its importance through my own presence. YouTube provides an informal documentary feeling of being there, such that witnessing performances through media can take on the status of an event. This captures one aspect of my experience watching King perform, but it also misses a great deal. For much as these videos might call me to witness, they are also constantly pointing my attention elsewhere. This is partially a result of the multi-sided media markets created by YouTube. Older forms of media participated in two-sided markets. Broadcast radio, newspapers, or network television all had to balance the interest of consumers on one side with those of the advertisers on the other. But digital media introduces, as Gene Burgess and Joshua Green put it, a wide array of users with diverse interests contributing and extracting value from the core product or service at different points. I would take their insight even further. It's not just that participants extract different value from the core product in different ways, but that stakeholders frequently have entirely divergent views about what counts as the core product, or if such a thing even exists. This ambiguity about what constitutes the core product can be partially explained by the ascendance of the asset over the commodity in online economies. The difference between these two economic entities are substantial. Whereas commodities are tangible goods for consumption by others, assets are immaterial, light, and mobile, while still being tied to the bodies, skills, and subjectivities of laborers. One purchases and disposes of a commodity as one sees fit, but digital creators provide access to an asset that they leverage without ever fully releasing ownership of it. As media scholar Kylie Jarrett argues, the driving economic force of digital life is assetization, not commodification. Assetization is further accompanied by what we might call advertification. The asset is constantly used to promote itself and related assets. Each video serves not as a commodity, music made into product that circulates for sale, but as leveraged asset and constant advertisement. In this network, value becomes so diffuse that it begins to resemble King's description of infinite time. Each video may take on the status of a profoundly meaningful event, but this very fact allows those same videos to simply defer that potential, directing me deeper and deeper into the network of assets and adverts. To paraphrase King, if every video is equally meaningless to me, as an asset in another's portfolio, or a mere advertisement, a paratext for an unending string of paratexts, then each video may also be the most meaningful thing I will ever experience. The meaning that many seem to find in such videos is that of inspiration. Oh, wait. There. No. There it is. On the YouTube video of King's TED performance, for example, when some commenters claim to appreciate her technique but to be unimpressed by the music itself, one user stepped in to shift their focus inward, saying, the true ability in a musician is their ability to inspire others. This is in some ways a product of the genre expectations that viewers familiar with the TED Talk would bring to the experience, but as Adorno suggests, the role of spectator and virtuoso can become blurred in the ritualistic atmosphere of virtuosity. In a concert, as in our dreams, Adorno says, the actors in the right may exchange their roles. Frequently, we may no longer know who is being sacrificed, the work, the virtuoso, or ourselves. If this happens in the concert hall, where strict protocols of behavior clearly maintain the boundaries separating audience and performer, streaming media, with the camera's intimate approach to the musician and my own intimate relation to the technologies on which I view it, may be even more conducive to this type of role reversal. We're on to the third path. Okay. One of the algorithmically sorted top comments on King's video comes from @John Gomm. So effing cool. Like many commenters on King's videos, Gomm is a guitarist himself. But unlike most of these guitarists, Gomm has an extensive YouTube presence. His clear breakout song is Passion Flower, which topped 20 million views as of last year. The number itself is a powerful guide to my experience. What amazes me so much about the musicians I encounter online is not simply that they execute their music so well, or that the persona are so compelling, or they craft their songs so expertly. Simply winning out over the tremendous mass of competing videos is remarkable. Musicologist Dana Gooley notes the circular causality of live virtuosity in the 19th century, saying, quote, on the one hand, Liszt's audiences applaud enthusiastically because he is a great artist. On the other, Liszt is a great artist because his audiences applaud enthusiastically. The same circularity can be found in the world of online streaming. The musician captures my attention because of their amazing skill. Their skill is amazing because it has captured my attention. Clicking on the video reveals Gomm in a dimly lit studio dressed in all black, a faint spotlight on him and a slew of petals on the ground at his feet. After an extended, loosely metered introduction, he locks in the tempo as he begins the song's main riff, played entirely in harmonics, except for the opening bass note. If we watched more of Gomm, we would see him doing a much more typical guitar face, much more active, embodied performance of the song that King so intentionally is avoiding. After I watched this original video, the algorithm surfaces a live clip of Passion Flower from 2023. I'm curious what, if anything, changes in live performance a dozen years later, so I click over. I find a very similar musical execution, but the paratexts are what fascinate me. YouTube's description field has become prime digital advertising space that is far too valuable for it to actually serve as description. Instead, the text links to a guitar magazine holding a fan vote to determine the greatest acoustic guitar song of all time. Like so many of the superlative statements that I discuss in my book, this one is somewhat absurd, as it's based on the idea that listeners can somehow choose a winner from a field that the magazine itself describes as spanning genres and generations. Still, it's a contest that any guitarist would want to win, so 30 seconds into a clip, the paratext leaps into the video itself. Vote now for Passion Flower. The in-video prompts keep coming, splitting my attention between the musical feats on display, the contest the song might win, and the other wares Gomm has on offer. I don't fault him for this, but to be clear, this is assetization and advertification at its finest. Because I have decided to surf the algorithm, but turn off autoplay, both videos of Passion Flower become numbers in a variety show that I curate alongside the algorithm, which predictably calls up more impressive guitarists. I click on a clip that I had forgotten about. Shredder Steve Vai's duel with the main character, played by Ralph Macchio of Karate Kid fame, for the 1986 film Crossroads. This is the climactic scene of the film where Vai serves as the devil's ringer guitarist in a contest with Macchio's character, who is playing to win back the soul of his musical mentor. It's a bit convoluted. Multiple commenters claim that Macchio prepared fastidiously to make his fake playing believable, a sort of choreographed cinematic precursor to the virtual virtuosity described by Kiri Miller in her discussion of the video game Guitar Hero. I don't bother confirming this, but it demonstrates one of the main reasons why this chapter of my book is the only one where I address my own experience. As I've learned over the last 12 years, if you're looking for virtuosity, you can find it almost anywhere. Human labor both produces and requires skill. Its lingering effects surround us. After viewing the Crossroads clip, my recommendations begin to drift into other forms of virtuosity. 3 paths stand before me. I can continue watching cinematic presentations of virtuosity, like clips from Amadeus or more of Crossroads. I can return to real-life guitar virtuosos, or I can turn to the athletic virtuosity of boxers like Muhammad Ali or Mike Tyson. Each of these paths stretch on endlessly, and they bring me from well-known names into occasionally obscure territory. Surfing the algorithm, awash in the endlessness of available content, begins to propagate virtuosity disconnected from any virtuoso. As I click through to each new recommendation, I'm deeply impressed by name after name and flourish after flourish. I experience virtuosity, skill made apparent and socially meaningful, and I encounter various iterations of the virtuoso persona, which I theorized earlier in the book as a musician engaged in at least partially unalienated labor. But the sheer number of musicians encountered reduces the likelihood that any of them will begin to acquire, for me, anything like a stable virtuoso identity. Rather than becoming more and more acquainted with their artistic personae, accruing details through performance and media and paratext, the process seems to reverse. The more I stream, the more deeply they recede into ideal types. In place of their specificity, and much to my dismay, I begin to recall only the broadest identity categories. That Polish guy was impressive. That Japanese girl could really play. That white kid was amazing. My awareness of identity markers points out another upsetting fact. This ad hoc variety show has quickly become the most homogeneous case study in my book. Musicians from a huge number of backgrounds representing endlessly diverse musical cultures regularly upload videos to YouTube. And I have found myself digitally surrounded by a narrow group of performers who look and occasionally even play a great deal like me. It's a humbling reminder of the ways that algorithmic recommendations tend to mirror my interests and identity back to me, encasing me in my own perspective. Social categories and implicit biases are baked into code from the beginning such that they appear natural, even innocent. Does YouTube know that I'm a straight, white, temporarily able-bodied, cisgendered man? I'm not sure, but the answer to this question, my colleague Benjamin Euler argues, doesn't matter. Whether or not the platform has categorized me in this way, it calls out to me through these categories, interpellating me as a subject partially constituted by them. Increasingly, my sense as I surf the algorithm is that my subjectivity, not just my subject position, but the interests and values at the core of my engagement with the world, is being amplified and projected beyond itself. In the real world, and this probably could go without saying, but to make it clear, in the real world, walking to class, driving to the store, talking with a family member, these interests and values originate at what phenomenologists would call the subject pull of a phenomenon. But recommendation algorithms increasingly introduce a similar dynamic emanating from the object pull. So this doubling up of what were once subjective contributions to experience marks a clear break with the world of non-digital reality, or even old media. Trees don't actively gather my attention as I drive past. The words on the page don't rearrange themselves into a new story based on what I read previously. The songs on an LP don't shift their genre based on the album I listened to yesterday. These are obviously absurd, surrealist scenarios, but they're not all that different from the types of transformations that occur in the background recommendations of our streaming practices. Streaming on YouTube seems to simultaneously scatter my attention while providing algorithmically assisted focus on aspects of each video that are likely to matter to me. And the more I reflect on this, the more I feel a slackening in my valuable connection to each new video. The algorithm carries my concerns for and before me. My subjective contributions to experience subsequently begin to seem less vital. If streaming sometimes feels tiring or laborious, imagine if you've ever gotten tired streaming, that may be because it is in fact labor, at least according to media scholars like Kylie Jarrett, who treat the category as a capacious one that involves, among other things, both the production and consumption of streaming media. For Jarrett, whether we are actively providing content or passively generating data, we are contributing to the attention economy that extracts value from these activities. I thought I was surfing the algorithm, but I may have actually been working alongside it. My playful engagement with these videos, which Jarrett admits may be disalienated for both viewers and content creators, was also an unpaid shift alongside countless others within deterritorialized attention factories. All that attention I provided also left a trail of data. Today, philosopher Byung-Hul Chun reminds me, the clicks we make and the search words we type are stored. Every step is watched and recorded. This is somewhat unsettling, but Han goes further. A complete picture of our lives exists on the internet. Our digital habitus provides an extremely precise likeness of our persons, our very souls. Perhaps it is even fuller and more accurate than the images we otherwise make of ourselves. My immediate reaction to these statements is to recoil. Surely this is grand theory with no place in a phenomenological account of experience. But then, Han is undoubtedly correct on one point. I forget my streaming habits quickly. The name of a musician or a song, even one I really liked, escapes me. If I'm sufficiently motivated, I eventually go searching for it in my browser history or another application. I am forgetful, even of myself and my preferences. The platforms I use, on the other hand, are not. I provide my data drip by drip, but it adds up because nothing is lost. We are caught in the total memory of the digital, Han writes ominously. In other words, the panopticon may have allowed one to see everything, but it didn't record everything. Big data, by contrast, Han writes, never forgets anything. Social psychologist Shoshana Zuboff would hasten to remind us that this is not simply a necessary feature of how the technology functions. The imperative to store and leverage data indefinitely comes from the social and economic logic of surveillance capitalism, not the digital machinery that it utilizes. Surveillance capitalism, writes Zuboff, unilaterally claims human experience as free raw material for translation into behavioral data, which can then be sold on behavioral future markets, where companies attempt to predict or influence our future behaviors. Their concern is not just the what of our engagements, but the how. In staking claim to experience, our very souls, according to Han, these companies are calculating something closer to what Harris Berger theorizes as stance. If intentionality names the unavoidable fact that our consciousness is always in relationship to something, stance names the equally unavoidable fact that that relation is always characterized by aspects of value, style, and affect. Many would argue that it is simply impossible for algorithms to grasp all the messy humanity of stance. Media scholars Christian Fuchs and David Chandler reassure me, computer algorithms cannot understand love, ethics, morals, solidarity, care, affects, and other distinctly human qualities. This is comforting at first, but algorithms have been designed to capture and triangulate my experience, not to understand it. The data conglomerated is meant to build an approximation of my affective and valuable tendencies, my modes of caring and attending to the contents of my experiences. In this, the hermeneutic circles of my own experience become part of yet another cyclical process. Call this the algorithmic circle. Now, the whole is me. Each click is a part that fleshes out the dataset whole of my subject position and consumer profile that YouTube and its advertisers can use to nudge me along with a soft power that is nonetheless extraordinarily strong. I chose to follow the algorithm, but of course, the algorithm works, exists to be followed. My choice, like all choices, was made in an uneven dialectic with existing structures, and it realized the risk of alienation inherent in the sheer digital abundance of streaming media. Each meaningful event superseded by another, the phenomena overlapping in a way almost too familiar to name. It's alienation by volume. We've made it to the conclusion, almost on time. Philosopher Babette Babbage suggests that scholars frequently engage with critiques of media and mass culture without really believing them for a moment. Or, if we do manage to believe them, we take them to apply only to the mindlessly average, not to us. Her assertion is one of several reasons why I wrote this part of my book in the first person, to force myself to think and speak not of them or even of us, but of me. Do I really believe streaming media to structure my experience in such potentially harmful ways? I much prefer to side with media scholar Paddy Scannell, who concludes his study of mediated experience by taking on a slew of foundational social theorists. I won't read this quote, but it's there for you if you want it. Though he states his point more eloquently, his basic claim is that the negative postures of Weber, Lukács, Adorno, and Horkheimer colored their view of technologically mediated experience. His perspective is undeniably inviting. The magic has come to abide in our homes. Let us not become disillusioned. Let us rejoice. Returning to my own experience, it seems that Babbage and Scannell may both be right. The world is shot through with meaning. At the same time, while I may not consistently believe the critiques of mass media and mass culture proffered by Adorno and the like, I don't quite disbelieve them either. I have found myself digitally measured and provided with the most comfortable ways to conform and consume. I've encountered in my streaming practices a creeping sense of alienation, a relation of relationlessness, as philosopher Rahel Jaggi puts it, an insidious numbing, that attends my encounter not with any particular video, but with the whole experience in sum. More than a simple contradiction, these two conflicting observations may be structurally intertwined. Channeling Adorno via McLuhan, Lydia Gurr notes, the more open the medium, the more closed off or reduced the message threatens to become. The seemingly endless array of virtuosities in equally endless domains blur or threaten to blur into a dull hum of the extraordinary made mundane through its unfailing ability. An excess of excess cancels itself out. Increasingly, my sense is that the virtuosities I've experienced in this streaming experiment have been only half fulfilled. The first component of my definition of the phenomenon occurs, but the second veers off course, their social meaning curtailed or co-opted. So I encounter skill made apparent and endlessly appropriated, skill made apparent and obligatory for survival, skill made apparent and subsumed under brand identity. My encounter with the laboring other becomes a hall of mirrors for my own desires. The remnants of the audiovisual cornucopia from which I have partaken rattle around my mind, seeming to murmur, look what they can do. Just think what you might do. Paratexts return to me. The true ability in a musician is their ability to inspire others. If this seems clearly tied to the types of videos that I watched, it's also, according to media theorist Amanda Lagerkvist, something that springs from the existential character of media. Quote, as they throw us, they further call us to actualize ourselves through them. We are, all of us, once again, thrown into a world of seemingly limitless digital abundance that also throws me into awareness of my own limits, of time, attention, energy, and care, even as it goads me in an attempt, or at least a desire, to surpass them. Thanks.
I was wondering if you've read Techno-Feudalism? Okay, because it was also talking about a lot of the same things with like, with cloud capitalism, there's no separation between your personal life and then like the commodification of you, and some other overlaps. So I thought,
there's definitely overlaps, and I talk like just to this point about the lack of separation in the chapter, which is somehow longer than this. I talk a lot about the absence of separation, that, you know, the sort of the classic model of ritual, which again was applied not just to sort of like religious rituals, but to theater and everything else, is you start with separation. And then you have the sort of liminal in-between phase, right? And one of the strange things for me thinking through what virtuosity means online, step back for a second, because virtuosity has almost, for the last 150 years in my field, been thought of as like rare and special and everything else, and that it's a really strange thing that, you know, I think I say in the book that it's like, you know, all of our lives intersect with this device or that device, right? And so it's not just a breakdown between sort of like our personal lives and our public lives or our roles as consumers and producers, but it's just that this experience, which traditionally was thought of as happening in a live concert hall where you would have all these experiences that separated and set it off as special, is now the most mundane thing, and again coming to you through the channels that are sort of the channel for everything, right? So yeah, thanks. Hand this over, Dennis. You don't have to have a question. You can just have
Maybe the question is, what is the end game in all this? Because, I mean, it seems to me that with all this streaming, and I don't do YouTube, but I stream a lot of music on Apple Music, and so there's just a danger that music gets so decontextualized from anything else. That people used to have music that was meaningful because it's what they listened to in high school and bound them with friends and a scene of some sort, and now it's just this rabbit hole. And I just kind of, the kind of guitar playing that you're talking about, it's not tied to anything. It's just, I mean, it's brilliant in its own way, but it's not. So I guess I don't really like that that much on a personal level. It's just, it's like I don't like Stephen Vai. I mean, there's just so many notes flying by. It's just like musically uninteresting, and it doesn't really have much emotion to it. It's just a lot of notes very quickly. So I wonder if people are just going to get sick of it after a while.
Can you repeat that just a little bit?
Oh,
You asked
no.
a long, great long question, but the video
wasn't
didn't
working.
pick it up as much. So if we can either repeat that or. There you go. Just like talk right into it.
Okay.
I love it. You'll never come back then. Sorry.
It was written on water. I don't know what I just said. So I guess I'm worrying about how this just tends to decontextualize the music, so no longer resonates with any other part of our lives. It's really just, at least potentially, it's just music. And it does, I don't know, I'm just missing something in this technique that these folks have, that music just never strikes me as terribly engaging. So I said some rude thing about Stephen Vai too. He just plays a lot of notes real fast.
And I this is one of those things that like I'm definitely not trying to sell you on any of these things. This question of decontextualization is super appropriate. One of the things that has come up when I've presented on this topic elsewhere is this sense that in some ways, even though they are opaque and we don't directly approach them, as you said in your first iteration of the question, right? Like that usually, you know, people love music and it's music they either listen to with their friends or frequently find through their friends, and that sort of algorithmic recommendations, whether it's YouTube or Spotify or anywhere else, right? Any of these things, they frequently stand in for sociality. In other words, right, like you don't need your friends to do it because the algorithm is like, have you heard this? Have you heard this? Have you heard this? And it's always there. So you're right, it does risk decontextualizing because, well, obviously, like there are, how should I put it? There are online communities, clearly, right? And they can be really vibrant and wonderful. Streaming practices, I think, encourage us to sort of act as isolated individuals, which does then risk making things just all feel like they're just sort of free-floating things that you don't know why you should care about them, right? And that's why I approached it this way, is because, you know, in my field, there's a lot of people who will do like digital ethnography and talk about online communities, which is great. I think there's a lot of good work happening there. But I'm also interested in the fact that it's like, yeah, but we can also just sort of like float namelessly and facelessly through these spaces, which I don't think is a good thing, and I think it's why I say like it's risking moving us more and more towards alienation, precisely because you get deeper and deeper into a hole that is just, it's personalized, right? It's yours. Like, and in terms of the notes things, I mean, I will say there's also something. I'm not saying that if you watched more Steve Vai, you would like it. But what I am going to say is, like, for someone like King and Gomm, I think part of the problem of, or let me put it this way, I think accelerated fandom is actually a potentially good thing if you like go deep into them. I think that's maybe, I say it's a constant opportunity. I think that third path is more common. And watching all of, or listening to, or watching, especially watching because it's such an audiovisual thing, watching all of King's The Neck is a Bridge to a Body, I think you might find something more there. But obviously, if you're doing what is the most common mode of engagement with it, which is sort of like, oh, that catches my eye, oh, you're sort of curating your variety show like I talk about, I think it makes it really easy to just feel like, okay, you're good. and to not feel like it connects to any broader. There's a lot. I mean, that's, yeah. I occasionally, yeah. I had somebody at a talk that I gave in the spring that sort of wanted me to sort of go like, so like, are they the best? Like, are these the two best? And I was like, there's too many. Like, there's no. These questions about superlatives are impossible, right? You might have answered them. And in the book, I talk about how it's weird that scholars of, I should probably say this. Yeah. Sorry. Scholars of virtuosity have long claimed that virtuosity is always comparative and it's always about being the best. And I argue in the book that I'm like, no, people don't do this very often, actually, right? I have a chapter about Tony Melendez, who plays guitar with his feet. There are other musicians who play guitar with their feet. I have never met an audience member at a Melendez concert or online who, after watching Melendez, is like, well, I got to go find some comps, right? Like, they're not real estate agents. Or like, they're amazed immediately, right? But part of what, like, the deadening thing that I think streaming can also do, that I talk about in the chapter, is that it actually does make things more comparative, because, like, even if I want to just proclaim a superlative, which is, there's like a joy in it as a fan of just going like, she's the greatest ever, right? And it feels kind of good to claim that. And these constant recommendations basically make it impossible, because you can hardly recover from like, whoa, I didn't know you could, oh, okay, well, I guess she's just as good. Oh, and I guess he's also somehow better, no, just different. Like, it makes the comparisons more avoidable and also more impossible to sort of find an off-ramp, which, again, I will say, like, if I feel that way as someone who's, you know, dedicated most of my life to the guitar, and, you know, like, I'm a sort of like card-carrying guild member of the sort of like people who know this and love this craft. If I feel that way, I'm going to assume that it's fairly widespread for anyone who cares enough to watch any of these videos.
I just had a comment, and am kind of interested in your feeling about this. And Dennis and I are similar age, so maybe we're kind of outliers here. But at one time, when people would buy an album or a CD, it told a story, and the songs related to one another, and the musician or the group would pace the songs with an intention to tell a story, and they might. The experience of listening to an entire album was similar in my view to reading a novel that might peak and ebb and flow as far as momentum. And when you're streaming, I know we're talking about virtuosity, but every song is a hit because we want that experience of, we're so used to hearing on the news that this is the greatest whatever the likes the world has ever seen. Everything is a superlative, it seems. But there's a time and a place for maybe a softer, quieter experience. And I was just wondering how you think we might have that experience if we're just streaming and we're only being fed these, examples of excellence. We don't ever hear that kind of quieter moment.
I mean, to posit a grand theory that I basically believe is that like the sort of media structures and the experiential structures that I'm describing here, I think are in some ways what's driving the sort of ever increasing vinyl revival. Like this thing, the idea of shaping an album and everything else, like this is fully out there. And again, like I'll say that I think King does this actually pretty beautifully on that full album. But again, I think people recognize the value in that, and again are seeking out old media precisely to not let themselves get lost in the wash of all this. But even musicians who are doing that, also like King, she doesn't have every video of that show up online, and the ones she puts up are sort of like more likely to be the sort of like most impressive hits. And it's interesting to listen to these. To take King and Gomm, who get the most time in the chapter, they both have a degree of ambivalence about virtuosity. They don't want it to be reduced to a gimmick. They have more to say. Again, I think that Gomm is a good songwriter, not just a good technician. He sings, and I think he does a good job with that. I think King is actually a good composer. I think she all this stuff is there. But they're also, they have to live in the world in which they live, and that is one where online, at least, much as they want to sort of not be just, what Dennis fears they might be, right? Which again, like I don't fault you for. There's a sense though that even though they are interested. I think if you were to tell them sort of like, if they were to hear your question, they'd be like, yeah, we're absolutely into those moments, and we absolutely want to offer that to our audiences. And at their shows, even, I've not seen Gomm live, but I've seen King live. They do, but the online space sort of encourages, like you say, to make everything at least a potential superlative, which, I'll just leave it there. Yeah.
Technical question, if you know the answer. How did they get the images on her guitar? Is that video added after the fact? She's got some kind of screen built into.
No, it's projector. Yeah,
it's just a projector. They just.
Wow. Guitar, and so like I've seen that show live.
That's really cool.
It is really cool, and like I would say as like a way of like keeping the virtuosity, but not letting it become a gimmick. I think this sort of visual thing that she's doing is brilliant. It's on a stand so again, she can't move it, right? It stays there. And she has a collaborator who, like, partially it's pre-programmed, but there's, at the show that I was at, there was a guy who was on a laptop and sort of doing some sort of, live manipulation of things, which is that's really, my original plan for this chapter was to try to see her doing this show a couple more times live and to interview her and really focus on that. And then we had interacted, we exchanged some messages before, and I just could not get a hold of her after. When I finally had the time to do it, it was like my trail had gone cold. So I was bummed because I agree. Like I find that approach really fascinating. But I was glad for the sake of the book because it. I start with radio, and I wanted something. I mentioned streaming in an earlier chapter, but this I felt like was sort of like a nice way to end things and bring them up to a present moment. Yeah.
Sure. What is your opinion on, like, creating music and art is a very human thing, but in modern society it feels like you're only allowed to really express that if you are amazing at it in some way. You can't sing badly. You can't show a video of yourself playing the guitar badly. What are your thoughts on the way that, I guess, virtuosity has been capitalized on?
Yeah, thank you for that. I think a lot about amateurism. I think amateurism has been set up as like the opposite of virtuosity, but I think actually they share values. I talk in the book about how frequently we want our professionals to still have the virtues of the amateur in the sense of like that they love the craft and that this is not just a sort of like dead-eyed money-making venture. But I think you're right that there's lots of very valid critiques of virtuosity as something that maybe is not all great. And one of them is that if you can get online and watch, endless strings of guitarists who are wonderful, it makes it hard to enjoy your sort of halting learning process as you sort of fumble about the instrument, right? So yeah, I think that's a real concern, and especially again, part of the joy of someone like King or Gomm doing this is the fact that like they play very well, and it's all like technically, you know, beautiful, but it's also like there's actually more, I don't want to say grit. You get more. We'll just go ahead and call it sort of like noise in the signal than with. There are other ways to get a cleaner, more pristine thing. And oddly enough, I think part of what audiences like from these musicians is that like it still feels like it's heavily technologized, and it's amazing, right? They're so proficient, but like perfection, I hear less about perfection among them, and I think in some ways the love of virtuosity is for those musicians is less about perfection and more about sort of like risk taking and labor. So there's a weird relationship. This is the last thing I'll say. There's a weird ongoing relationship between sort of like amateur communities and the professional virtuoso, because in some ways they depend on them. Like I say in the chapter, I'm going to write about this from the standpoint of a guitarist. A non-guitarist would almost certainly never come across these videos, right? Like the reason I'm there is because I'm part of a community who like cares about the instrument. So in a weird way, no, you wouldn't. No, you never would, right? Yeah, and so it's the type of thing that in some ways there is a sort of community of practice, a community of like amateurs and professionals. Again, like Gomm is online commenting too on Kaki King's videos, right? So in some ways it nourishes it, and like these musicians need people who sort of know and care about the instrument, who are not that great and are not making a living off of it. And at the same time, you can see how it could have a deadening effect. And so there's a constant tension between, like whether or not is anyone going to take the risk of being bad at something whenever there are so many people who are so good at it. You're like, oh, that's real. But then at the same time, you go, the people that are going to King's concerts for the most part are guitarists, right? The people who are going to Gomm's concerts for the most part are guitarists. And so it's hard to sort of suss out whether the sort of the benefits to the amateur community are outweighed by the potential damages to it. Yeah, thanks for that question. All right. It's 1:05, y'all. I think we'll call it.